The air in The Gilded Lily, a restaurant whispered about in hushed, reverent tones and booked months in advance, hummed with an expectant, almost palpable energy. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light, casting a warm, golden glow on the polished mahogany tables and the impeccably dressed patrons. Laughter, the clinking of silverware against fine china, and the murmur of hushed conversations wove a symphony of refined celebration. And then there was me, Maya, drowning in a sea of anticipatory bliss, my heart a hummingbird trapped against my ribs, ready to take flight. Across the table, Liam's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met mine. They held a depth I'd known for years, a comfortable familiarity that had blossomed into something profound, something that made my breath catch in my throat. He'd been my anchor, my confidant, my best friend, and for the past 2 years, my lover. Tonight, he'd promised, was different. He'd been cagey, his smile tinged with a nervous excitement that had mirrored my own. "Just trust me," he'd said, his voice a low rumble against my ear, his fingers tracing the curve of my jaw. "This is big." Big was an understatement. The restaurant was packed, not just with our closest friends and family, but with people I barely recognized, faces I'd seen in society pages, acquaintances Liam had invited with a casual wave of his hand, adding to the mystery. My parents, beaming, sat at a table to my left, my mother's hand fluttering to her pearls, her eyes glistening. My best friend, Chloe, a whirlwind of vibrant energy, was perched on the edge of her seat, her gaze darting between Liam and me, a conspiratorial grin playing on her lips. Liam's parents, elegant and reserved, occupied a more distant table, their approval a silent, weighty force. Liam, ever the showman, had orchestrated this entire evening with meticulous detail. The private room, the hushed ambiance, the discreet waiters circulating with trays of champagne. It all felt like a scene plucked from a romantic novel. He'd even managed to get the notoriously private owner of the Gilded Lily to reserve the entire space. "For a special occasion," he'd explained to me, his eyes twinkling. Our special occasion. My stomach did a nervous flip. I'd spent days agonizing over my outfit, settling on a sapphire blue silk dress that shimmered with every subtle movement, a dress that felt both elegant and a little daring. My hair was swept up in a sophisticated chignon, a few strands artfully framing my face. I'd even indulged in a touch of smoky eyeliner, a rare indulgence for my usually understated style. I wanted to look unforgettable, because tonight, I knew, would be unforgettable. Liam, as always, was a vision. He wore a tailored navy suit, the crisp white shirt a perfect contrast to his tanned skin. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and the slight stubble that dusted his jaw added a touch of rugged charm. He exuded an effortless confidence, a magnetism that had drawn me in from the moment we'd met at a charity gala 2 years ago. He'd been a whirlwind of charm and wit, sweeping me off my feet with a speed that had left me breathless. The appetizers had been exquisite: delicate truffle arancini, seared scallops with a saffron aioli, and tiny, perfectly formed foie gras terrines. Each bite was a testament to Liam's impeccable taste, his understanding of what I loved. He'd watched me with an intensity that made my cheeks flush, his thumb occasionally brushing against mine as he reached for a shared dish. "You're quiet tonight, Maya," he murmured, his voice a low, intimate sound even amidst the din. I met his gaze, my heart swelling. "Just taking it all in," I confessed, a shy smile playing on my lips. "This is incredible, Liam. You've outdone yourself." He reached across the table, his fingers intertwining with mine. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "It's just the beginning, my love," he whispered, his thumb caressing the back of my hand. "Just the beginning." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I squeezed his hand, my anticipation reaching a fever pitch. The air crackled with unspoken promises, with the weight of a future we were so eager to embrace. I imagined the proposal, the ring, the joyous tears. The main course arrived, a symphony of flavors and textures. Pan-seared duck breast with a cherry reduction, roasted lamb tenderloin with rosemary and garlic, and a delicate sea bass with lemon butter sauce. Liam, with a flourish, signaled for the waiter. "Before we dive into this culinary masterpiece," Liam announced, his voice cutting through the gentle hum of conversation, drawing the attention of every diner in the room, "I have something rather important to say." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Liam, then to me. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment I'd been dreaming of, the moment I'd replayed 1,000 times in my mind. My hands trembled slightly, and I clasped them in my lap. Liam stood, his gaze fixed on me. He looked impossibly handsome, bathed in the warm glow of the chandeliers. He reached into his jacket pocket, and my heart leaped into my throat. He pulled out a small, velvet box. The room fell silent, the only sound the frantic thumping of my own heart. My parents leaned forward, their faces etched with anticipation. Chloe let out a little squeal of delight. Liam's eyes, those stormy sea eyes, were filled with an emotion so profound, so raw, that it took my breath away. He opened the box, revealing a dazzling diamond ring, its facets catching the light and scattering it like 1,000 tiny stars. "Maya," he began, his voice resonating with emotion, echoing through the sudden, absolute stillness of the room. "My Maya." He took a step towards me, his gaze never leaving mine. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were different. You ignited a fire in me, a passion I never knew I possessed. You've brought so much joy, so much light into my life. You are my best friend, my confidant, the woman I want to spend every single day with." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I could feel a smile spreading across my face, a smile so wide it felt like it might split my face. This was perfect, absolutely perfect. "And so," Liam continued, his voice growing stronger, clearer, as he knelt before me, the velvet box held aloft, the diamond glinting in the light. "I want to ask you, here, in front of everyone who matters to us, in this place that you love." He paused, his eyes searching mine, and for a fleeting second, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher crossed his face. A shadow? A doubt? I dismissed it, attributing it to nerves, to the overwhelming emotion of the moment. "Maya," he said, his voice firm, unwavering, and he spoke the words that would forever be etched into my memory, the words that would become the preamble to a 7-year silence. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to hold its breath. The clinking of ice in glasses ceased. The murmurs of conversation died away. There was only Liam, kneeling before me, the ring a beacon of promise, and my heart, ready to explode with joy. "Yes," I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Liam, yes! 1,000 times, yes!" A collective sigh of relief and joy swept through the room. Applause erupted, a thunderous wave of sound that washed over me, drowning out everything but the sheer, unadulterated happiness that filled me. Liam slid the ring onto my finger, the cool metal a perfect fit, the diamond a dazzling testament to our love. He rose, and I threw my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder, tears of pure joy streaming down my cheeks. He held me tight, his lips brushing against my temple. "I love you, Maya," he whispered, his voice muffled against my hair. "I love you too, Liam," I whispered back, my voice choked with happiness. He pulled back, his eyes shining, and then, Then he did something that made my world tilt on its axis. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a fleeting kiss, a kiss that felt final. And then, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked away. Not towards our table, not towards our cheering friends and family, but towards the private exit at the back of the room, a door I hadn't even noticed. He didn't look back. The applause continued, but it began to sound distant, muffled by the sudden, deafening roar in my ears. Chloe was beside me now, her initial joy morphing into confusion. My parents were on their feet, their smiles faltering. "Liam," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Liam, where are you going?" But Liam was gone. The velvet box, the ring, the proposal. It was all real. But the man himself, the man who had just asked me to marry him, had vanished into thin air, leaving me standing there, a diamond on my finger and a gaping chasm in my heart, the echoes of his promises swallowed by an unnerving silence. The Gilded Lily, moments before a haven of joy, had suddenly become a monument to my bewilderment. The silence that descended was not a gentle hush, but a gaping chasm, a void that swallowed the remnants of their celebratory din. It was a silence so profound, so unnerving, that I could hear the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs, a frantic, trapped hummingbird desperate for release. My gaze, still locked on the now empty doorway Liam had vanished through, felt like a physical tether, pulling me toward an answer that wasn't there. The ring, cool and heavy on my finger, was no longer a beacon of promise, but a stark, glittering weight. Around me, the murmurs began, hesitant at first, like the rustling of dry leaves before a storm. Faces, once alight with shared joy and anticipation, were now etched with confusion, concern, and a dawning bewilderment. My mother, seated at the table closest to us, her usually composed features contorted with worry, reached for my hand. Her touch, a familiar comfort, felt alien now, a reminder of a world I had so recently inhabited, a world that seemed to have evaporated with Liam's last breath. "Maya? Darling, what on earth?" Her voice was a strained whisper, barely audible above the rising tide of whispered speculation. I couldn't answer. My throat felt constricted, as if Liam's departure had stolen the very air I needed to breathe. I looked at the faces of our friends, of his family. Liam's parents, elegant and reserved, occupied a more distant table, their approval a silent, weighty force that had always felt just out of reach. Now, their expressions mirrored the mass confusion, their practiced composure faltering. His mother, a woman whose regal bearing was as meticulously maintained as her designer wardrobe, leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, searching for an explanation that eluded us all. My own friends, the ones who had tittered and clapped with such genuine delight moments before, were now exchanging uneasy glances. Sarah, my maid of honor, her smile frozen in place, looked utterly lost. Ben, Liam's best man, a man usually brimming with boisterous energy, stood rigidly, his jaw tight, his gaze darting between me and the empty doorway. He looked as though he'd been struck by lightning, a bewildered statue in a tableau of surreal abandonment. The maître d', a man whose professionalism was as legendary as the restaurant's exclusivity, approached our table with a solicitous, yet clearly baffled, expression. His starched white shirt seemed to gleam with an almost accusatory brilliance. "Madame, is everything amiss? Amsi?" The word felt like a pathetic understatement. Amsi was the wrong word entirely. This was a cataclysm. This was a seismic shift that had fractured the very foundation of my reality. I finally managed to pull my gaze away from the doorway and looked at the ring. The diamond, a flawless cushion cut that Liam had described as mirroring the depth of my eyes, seemed to mock me with its brilliance. It was a perfect cold testament to a moment that had imploded. He just left, I managed, my voice raspy, unfamiliar even to my own ears. It was a pathetic explanation, a hollow echo of the grand pronouncements that had just filled the room. The maitre d' blinked, his professional facade cracking just enough to reveal a flicker of genuine shock. Left? But after the proposal? The word hung in the air, a grotesque punctuation mark. Proposal. Yes, he had proposed, in front of everyone. And then he had vanished. The sheer absurdity of it all threatened to buckle my knees. I gripped the edge of the table, the polished mahogany cool and unyielding beneath my trembling fingertips. Yes, I whispered, the word catching in my throat. After the proposal. The stunned silence returned, thicker this time, heavier with unspoken questions and the palpable weight of social awkwardness. The guests, who had been on the cusp of heartfelt congratulations, were now trapped in a social purgatory, unsure how to proceed. The celebratory clinking of champagne flutes had ceased. The gentle hum of conversation had died. All that remained was the chilling echo of Liam's hasty exit and the gaping chasm it had left in my heart. My mother squeezed my hand, her nails digging in slightly, a silent plea for me to compose myself. But composure felt like an impossible luxury. I was adrift, cast out into a turbulent sea of confusion and humiliation, with no anchor, no compass, and no sign of Liam's return. Ben, finally roused from his stupor, strode towards me, his face a mask of grim determination. "Maya, are you all right? What the hell was that?" His voice was low, urgent, laced with a frustration that mirrored my own growing panic. I shook my head, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, blurring the opulent surroundings into a hazy, distorted landscape. "I don't know, Ben. I don't understand." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, was already on her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm calling his apartment. Maybe he just forgot something. Had an emergency." She said it with a hopeful lilt, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. We all knew Liam. He was meticulous, theatrical, never one to miss an opportunity for drama. But this was beyond drama. This was abandonment. Liam's parents rose from their table, their expressions a mixture of concern and veiled disapproval. His father, a stern man who rarely showed emotion, approached me, his gaze steady. "Maya, this is unexpected. Is there anything we can do?" His offer, though polite, felt hollow. What could they do? They couldn't conjure Liam back into the room. They couldn't explain his actions. They were his parents, yes, but even they, I suspected, were privy to only a fraction of his complexities. "I don't think so, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." The atmosphere in the Gilded Lily had transformed from one of joyous celebration to a somber, almost funereal gathering. The exquisite appetizers, meticulously arranged on silver platters, now seemed to mock our collective distress. The wine, a rare vintage Liam had personally selected, sat untouched in our glasses. The ambiance, once humming with anticipatory bliss, now crackled with an unnerving tension. I looked down at my hands again. The ring. It was so beautiful, so undeniably real. And yet, the man who had placed it there was gone, a phantom presence in a room full of witnesses. The question that gnawed at me, the one that pulsed with every frantic beat of my heart, was not why he had left, but if he would ever return. The silence stretched, an unbearable weight, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was not a misunderstanding. This was a vanishing act, and I was the unwitting audience, left alone on stage with a dazzling ring and a profound, echoing emptiness. Hours later, the restaurant was emptying. The polite goodbyes, the concerned glances, the awkward pats on the shoulder, they all blurred into a meaningless cacophony. My mother had insisted on taking me home, her arm a steady presence around my shoulders. Sarah and Ben had stayed behind, attempting to salvage what remained of the evening to smooth over the social catastrophe, but I knew it was a futile effort. The image of Liam's retreating back was seared into my mind, an indelible brand. The drive home was a silent testament to our collective bewilderment. My mother kept glancing at me, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own, but also a nascent anger. She had adored Liam, had seen him as the perfect suitor for her daughter. Now that illusion had been shattered, replaced by a stark, brutal reality. When we finally arrived at my apartment, the familiar surroundings felt alien. The cozy living room, usually a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy. I walked to the window, the same window Liam had often stood by, gazing out at the city lights, his arm draped casually around my shoulders. Now I stood there alone, the city a glittering, indifferent expanse. I touched the ring again. It felt colder now, the metal a stark contrast to the phantom warmth of Liam's hand. 7 years. The thought, when it finally surfaced, was a chilling premonition. 7 years. I didn't know why that number had sprung into my mind, unbidden, but it settled over me like a shroud. It was a ridiculous, unfounded fear. Liam wouldn't disappear for 7 years. He couldn't. He loved me. He had just proposed. But as I stood there, the city lights reflecting in the diamond, a cold, creeping dread began to take root. The meticulous planning, the grand gesture, the sudden, inexplicable exit, it all pointed to something far more calculated than a spontaneous act of panic. It pointed to a prearranged disappearance, and the sheer audacity of it, the public spectacle of his proposal, followed by his immediate vanishing act, was a testament to a level of deception I was only beginning to comprehend. My mother, bless her heart, tried to fill the silence. "We'll figure this out, Maya. We'll call the police, his family, his friends. Someone must know something." I nodded, but my gaze remained fixed on the distant horizon. The initial shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a profound sense of betrayal. The man I thought I knew, the man who had whispered promises of forever just hours before, had evaporated like smoke, leaving behind only a lingering scent of expensive cologne and an unbearable question mark. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, tearful conversations, and a growing sense of helplessness. We contacted Liam's parents, his friends, even his colleagues. No one had any answers. His apartment was empty, his phone disconnected. It was as if he had ceased to exist. The police, while sympathetic, could do little without any concrete evidence of foul play. He was an adult, they said. He had the right to leave. The right to leave. The words echoed in the hollow chambers of my heart. He had the right to leave. But he didn't have the right to propose and then vanish. He didn't have the right to shatter my world in front of hundreds of people and leave me to pick up the pieces. The ring, once a symbol of eternal love, became a constant, painful reminder of his absence, a glittering monument to my bewilderment. I tried to go back to work, to resume my life, but everything felt muted, drained of its color. The joy I had once found in simple things was overshadowed by a persistent ache, a phantom limb of a life that had been so cruelly amputated. Friends offered condolences, platitudes, their words like a balm on a wound that refused to heal. They whispered about him, about his mysterious ways, his unpredictable nature. But no one could offer a single explanation that made sense. The media, predictably, had a field day. The disappearing groom became a sensational headline, a tragic tale of love gone wrong. I retreated further, shutting out the world, unable to bear the pitying glances and speculative whispers. The Gilded Lily became a place I could never revisit, a monument to a moment of exquisite joy that had curdled into an unbearable sorrow. Weeks turned into months. The initial frenzy subsided, replaced by a quiet, pervasive grief. The questions remained, a constant hum beneath the surface of my days. Why? What was the plan? Was this a prank? A cruel game? Or something far more sinister? The lack of answers was the cruelest torture. I kept the ring, unable to bring myself to remove it. It was the only tangible piece of him I had left, a cruel, glittering anchor to a man who had become a ghost. I would trace its cool surface, the intricate setting, the way the diamond caught the light, and I would wonder if he had ever truly loved me, or if this too was part of an elaborate, devastating performance. One evening, several months after Liam's disappearance, I found myself staring at a faded photograph of us, taken just weeks before the proposal. We were laughing, our heads tilted together, the picture radiating a warmth that felt like a distant memory. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't noticed then, a shadow, a fleeting unease that I had mistaken for romantic intensity. Now, it looked like guilt. Or perhaps something even more calculated. The desire to understand, to find closure, began to outweigh the pain of his absence. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Liam Sterling was not the man I believed him to be. And until I understood who he truly was and why he had chosen to disappear, I would never be free. The storm had passed, leaving behind a desolate landscape. But the unanswered questions were the lingering debris, a constant reminder of the man who had proposed to me in front of everyone, and then, without a word, had vanished for how long? The thought was a terrifying abyss. The applause, a sudden, jarring eruption, died as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind an unnerving silence that pressed in on me. My breath hitched, a ragged sound lost in the vast, suddenly cold expanse of the dining room. Liam. He was gone. Not just out of my sight, but gone. The private exit, a discreet, almost invisible door tucked behind a velvet curtain, had swallowed him whole. My fingers, still tingling from the cool weight of the diamond he'd placed there, trembled. The opulent setting, moments before a stage for our perfect, shared future, now felt like a gilded cage. My gaze swept over the stunned faces of our guests. My parents, their initial joy curdling into confusion, were staring at the now empty doorway. Liam's parents, their elegant masks of polite interest cracking, exchanged bewildered glances. Friends, who had tittered and whispered in conspiratorial delight just moments before, now sat frozen, their champagne flutes held mid-air. The vibrant energy that had thrummed through the Gilded Lily had evaporated, replaced by a palpable, suffocating bewilderment. It was a tableau of disbelief, and I was its unwilling centerpiece. Liam? The word was a whisper, a fragile, lost thing. I pushed myself away from the table, the silk of my dress rustling like dry leaves. My legs felt strangely disconnected, as if they belonged to someone else. I took a step towards the velvet curtain, a primal instinct urging me to pull it aside, to find him, to demand an explanation. But a hand, my father's, landed on my arm, firm and grounding. Maya, darling, perhaps we should... His voice trailed off, his own confusion evident. Liam's father, a man not prone to outward displays of emotion, was already moving towards the private exit. His jaw set. A ripple of movement went through the room as guests, their earlier celebratory mood shattered, began to murmur amongst themselves, their hushed tones a stark contrast to the earlier din. I stood there, the diamond on my finger a blinding, mocking beacon. It was too heavy, too real, for a phantom. The man who had knelt before me, whose eyes had held such a fervent intensity, had vanished as if he were a conjured illusion. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume, suddenly felt suffocating. I felt a desperate need to escape, to flee the suffocating gaze of these people, to find a space where I could unravel this impossible reality. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls, hushed conversations, and a gnawing, icy dread. Liam's apartment was empty. His meticulously organized closet held only a few vacant hangers, a ghost of his presence. His phone went straight to a disconnected message. His parents, usually so composed, were distraught, admitting they knew nothing more than I did. They spoke of Liam's recent preoccupation, his late nights, his vague answers to their questions, but nothing that could have prepared them, or me, for this. The police were polite, sympathetic even, but ultimately unhelpful. A missing persons report was filed, a few perfunctory questions were asked, but without any indication of foul play or a credible threat. Liam had simply left. He was an adult, they explained, and if he wished to disappear, there was little they could do. The media, however, was less restrained. The story, initially a whisper of a bizarre engagement party gone awry, quickly escalated. Headlines screamed about the runaway groom, the phantom fiancé. Paparazzi staked out my apartment, their lenses like predatory eyes, eager to capture my grief, my confusion, my unraveling. The gilded lily, once a symbol of our shared dream, became a subject of morbid fascination, its exclusivity now a backdrop to a public spectacle of abandonment. I found myself replaying every moment, every conversation, every touch, searching for clues, for a hidden meaning I had missed. Was there a shadow in his eyes that night that I had mistaken for passion? A flicker of something unreadable that I had dismissed as nerves? His meticulous planning, his flawless execution of the proposal, it all pointed to a deliberate, calculated act. But why? And to what end? The diamond on my finger felt like a brand, a constant reminder of his presence and his absence. I couldn't bear to take it off, not yet. It was the only tangible link to the man who had promised me forever, only to vanish into thin air. It was a symbol of betrayal, yes, but also a symbol of a mystery I was now compelled to solve. The initial shock had begun to recede, replaced by a stubborn, simmering resolve. This wasn't just a broken engagement, it was a profound deception, and I would not let it define me. I started digging, discreetly at first. I spoke to his closest friends, the ones who had been at the restaurant, the ones who had seemed as blindsided as I was. Their stories were variations on a theme. Liam was charming, successful, a little cagey about his past, but nothing pointed to this. He had friends, yes, but no one who claimed to know him intimately, no one who had shared his deepest secrets. He was a man who curated his life, presenting a polished facade to the world. And I, in my blissful ignorance, had fallen for the masterpiece. One of his college friends, a man named Mark, who had seemed particularly uncomfortable during our brief conversation, mentioned Liam's fascination with disappearing acts, with reinvention. He used to joke about starting over, about shedding his skin, Mark had said, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. Said if things got too much, he'd just vanish. At the time, I'd laughed it off as a dark, quirky sense of humor. Now, the words echoed with a chilling prescience. I began to suspect the proposal itself was not an act of love, but a carefully orchestrated final scene. The public spectacle, The grand gesture. It was all designed to maximize the impact of his departure, to ensure that when he disappeared, the world would notice. But it wasn't just the world I needed to worry about. It was me. The lack of any explanation, any farewell, was the most agonizing part. It was the absence of closure, the gaping chasm where answers should have been. I felt like a character in a play, left on stage after the lead actor had walked off mid-scene. The audience was confused, the critics were baffled, and I, the ingenue, was left holding a prop ring and a script that had abruptly ended. Days bled into weeks. The media frenzy eventually subsided, the sensational headlines replaced by newer, more scandalous fodder. But the emptiness Liam left behind remained, a constant, dull ache. I returned to my work, trying to find solace in routine. But the world felt different. Every man's smile seemed a little too charming, every confident stride a potential prelude to an escape. Trust, once an easy, unthinking commodity, had become a precious, guarded treasure. I spent hours poring over Liam's digital footprint. Social media profiles that were either meticulously curated and offered little insight, or had been deactivated entirely. Emails that were professional, polite, and devoid of any personal revelation. It was as if he had scrubbed himself clean from the internet, leaving behind only the ghost of a persona. There was one anomaly, however. A single obscure forum dedicated to urban exploration and abandoned places. Liam had a username, Nomad7. His posts were infrequent, dating back years, filled with cryptic descriptions of forgotten tunnels, decaying factories, and the thrill of venturing into the unknown. He spoke of the allure of anonymity, of the freedom found in being unseen. One post, in particular, sent a shiver down my spine. The greatest escape is not from a place, but from oneself. And sometimes, the only way to truly shed the old skin is to disappear entirely, to become a stranger, even to yourself. A new beginning requires a complete erasure. Erasure. The word resonated with a terrible finality. Was this what he had done? Had he erased himself, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of a life that had been built on a foundation of lies? The thought was almost unbearable. Then a different kind of thought began to take root, a seed of suspicion planted by the sheer audacity of his disappearance. If this was a planned disappearance, it was a grand, elaborate one. It wasn't just about leaving me, it was about leaving everyone. His friends, his family, his life. It implied a motive far greater than a simple desire to escape a relationship. It suggested a desperate need for a complete reset, a total transformation. And the 7 years. Where had that number come from? It had surfaced in my mind, a persistent, unsettling whisper, even before I had any reason to believe his absence would be prolonged. It was an intuition, a chilling premonition that felt as concrete as the diamond on my finger. 7 years. It sounded like a sentence, a period of exile, or perhaps a period of transformation. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wouldn't find answers by simply waiting. I had to actively seek them. Liam had left me with a question, a profound, life-altering question. And I was determined to find the answer, no matter how long it took. The man who had proposed to me in front of everyone had vanished. But the mystery he left behind had become my obsession. And in that obsession, I began to find a strange kind of purpose, a reason to move forward, to unravel the truth behind the disappearing groom. The trail was cold, the clues were scant, but the image of Liam, standing there, his gaze locked on mine before he turned and walked away, was seared into my memory. He had disappeared for a reason, and I was going to find out what it was. The thought of 7 years, A vast, empty expanse of time was daunting. But it also felt like a challenge I was ready to accept. The silence that followed Liam's vanishing act was a physical entity, a suffocating shroud that descended upon the remnants of our celebration. Laughter died on lips, forks clattered onto porcelain, and the murmuring hum of the restaurant devolved into a collective, gaping gasp. My own breath hitched, caught somewhere between disbelief and a rising tide of panic. The diamond, a blinding sun on my finger, felt suddenly like a brand, a searing testament to a public humiliation I couldn't yet comprehend. Days bled into weeks, each one a fresh assault of speculation and pity. The tabloids, with their insatiable hunger for scandal, christened Liam the runaway groom. His handsome face, once a symbol of every romantic ideal I'd ever harbored, leered from glossy pages, juxtaposed with headlines screaming betrayal and abandonment. Liam's apartment, when I finally managed to get the landlord to let me in, was eerily sterile, as if scrubbed clean of any trace of him, save for a faint, lingering scent of his expensive cologne. His phone was disconnected, his email accounts dormant. His parents, their faces etched with a grief that mirrored my own, offered only platitudes and bewildered pronouncements of their son's inexplicable behavior. Liam's friends, a tight-knit circle of impeccably dressed men who had always seemed to share a cagey camaraderie with him, became evasive, their answers shorter, their gazes shifting away from mine. The weight of Liam's absence was immense, a void that threatened to swallow me whole. But beneath the crushing despair, a flicker of something else began to ignite. Anger, sharp and undeniable. And with it, a nascent suspicion that this wasn't the impulsive, heartbroken flight of a man overwhelmed by commitment. This was too deliberate, too orchestrated. Liam, the meticulous planner, the man who color-coded his sock drawer, wouldn't simply run. Not like this. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I began to dig. I combed through his digital footprint, a labyrinth of forgotten social media profiles and obscure online forums. It was in the shadowed corners of the internet, in encrypted messages and deleted comment histories, that I found the first tendrils of explanation. Liam's fascination with reinvention wasn't new, but it had taken a darker turn. He'd explored digital erasure, the art of systematically deleting one's online presence. He'd posted under a pseudonym about shedding old skin, about the intoxicating freedom of becoming a blank slate. One cryptic thread, buried deep within a forum dedicated to identity theft and clandestine living, spoke of a 7-year cycle, a period of transformation and rebirth. The words, abstract and unsettling, lodged themselves in my mind, a chilling premonition that refused to dissipate. 7 years. The phrase echoed in the hollow spaces of my heart, a phantom limb of a future that had been brutally amputated. It was an arbitrary number, yet it felt imbued with a sinister significance, a hidden roadmap to his disappearance. Liam was not the man I had fallen in love with. The charming, confident facade had crumbled, revealing something far more complex, something that hinted at a profound deception. His vanishing act wasn't a mistake. It was a meticulously planned escape, and I, Maya, the unsuspecting fiancé, had been merely a prop in his elaborate performance, a witness to the grand reveal of his ultimate disappearing act. The question that gnawed at me, the one that fueled my relentless investigation, was no longer why he left, but what he was running towards, and what, precisely, was his motive for leaving me in such spectacular, soul-crushing fashion. My search for Liam morphed from a desperate plea for his return to a calculated pursuit of the truth. I delved into his past, tracing whispers of his earlier life, his nomadic tendencies, stints in different cities, brief, intense friendships that always seemed to end abruptly. He'd always been a chameleon, adapting to his surroundings, adopting new personas with an unsettling ease. I remembered how he'd once told me, with a wry smile, that he could disappear into a crowd of 1,000 and no one would notice. At the time, I'd dismissed it as charming bravado. Now, it felt like a chilling prophecy. I started with his childhood, piecing together fragments from distant relatives and old schoolmates. He'd been an only child, raised by parents who, while seemingly devoted, had always projected an air of detached perfection. There were whispers of a strained relationship, of Liam feeling overshadowed, suffocated by their expectations. He craved anonymity, a space where he could forge his own identity, unburdened by the weight of their legacy. This need for escape, for reinvention, seemed to be a running thread through his entire existence. Then came the breakthrough, a dusty box of old photographs unearthed from his mother's attic during a tense, silent visit. Among the stiffly posed family portraits and awkward childhood snapshots, I found it. A worn, leather-bound journal. Liam's handwriting, surprisingly neat and precise, filled its pages. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, more a collection of observations, philosophical musings, and elaborate fantasies. He wrote about the ephemeral nature of identity, the thrill of shedding one's past, the art of becoming someone entirely new. He detailed his fascination with illusionists, with spies, with anyone who had managed to successfully vanish from the public eye. And then I found the entry that made my blood run cold. Dated nearly a year before he proposed, it spoke of a grand design, a 7-year sabbatical where he would orchestrate his own oblivion, only to re-emerge, reborn. He wrote of needing a catalyst, a public spectacle to legitimize his disappearance, to create a narrative that would hold the world's attention while he disappeared. He spoke of a fiancé, someone beautiful and intelligent, someone who would be the perfect unwitting centerpiece for his final act before the curtain fell. My breath hitched. He hadn't just chosen me, he had selected me. I was the carefully chosen pawn in his elaborate game. The journal also contained a detailed breakdown of his financial affairs